Hey yo, what's up? Alex from Metamind Music, and in this video we're going to continue mixing our drums for rock, and more specifically we're going to look at the room mics and all of the parallel and extra processing going on with the drums to get them rock solid. So I'm going to play you a little snippet and then we're going to zoom in on the room mic, which is super important when you're working with live drums. And if you're working with programmed drums and you really want to enhance like the impact and the realness and glue all the individual elements of your snare, your kick, your overheads, whatever other percussion elements you have, you're going to want to try and create a room in which they all live and share a space so that they feel connected together and not just a bunch of isolated elements, if that's what you're after anyway. So I'm going to play some drums, then I'll solo the room, and then we'll look at the processing going on in the room. And then I'll solo the room here. So I'm going to take off all the processing and kind of walk through it. So this is the raw room sound. So the first step is I brought up an EQ and I put a high pass filter at about 100 hertz or 150 hertz or so, because you don't need any of the super low end. You already have your kick drum, you already have your bass drum occupying that, and there's a lot of low end frequencies in a room. So I just cut them all out, and then I did a cut at about 500 hertz because it was just like this boxy frequency. I'll A/B that, and then I did just another little cut here and a low pass filter just to cut off all the high end stuff, because I'm not looking to get any of the high end sizzle out of the cymbals. I already have that with the overheads. So I'm just looking to get a lot of the body of the drums and the snare and the kick to really come through and to mix it in to just get that extra impact and space in the drum mix. So I'll A/B these individual cuts here. So that's cutting out the low end, cutting out the high end that we don't need. This is the big cut. I'll boost it so you can hear it. A lot of it is the same frequency that we cut in the snare is coming through on the room as well. So I just cut that out because I didn't really like it. And then this other little cut. It's just kind of a tinny, mouthy frequency. So that just smooths it out a little bit. This next plugin I have going is, again, back to the tried and true 1176. And in this one I used a preset called Rock My Room, which you can guess is intended for rooms. Big surprise. And basically it's using the famous all mode of this compressor, which is like all out, just crushing the room, compressing it like crazy. And that's kind of what we want out of this room track, is to get that explosion and that extreme dynamic and really bring it out with a compressor. So I'll A/B this for you so you can hear what's happening. So when I boost that, you get a lot more cymbal bleed, but you get that snare, you get that kick, and you get the roominess really coming out, right? You're really bringing the ambience of the room out. So that's a great trick. Next, what I have here is my SSL channel that I like to use on almost everything. And I'm cutting out the low end again, cutting out some of the high end, not doing very much boosting, but all I'm doing is cutting out this frequency again. You hear that like wobbly wub 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 frequency. I just want to cut it out so that it's not over cut out, but I definitely don't want any of that frequency in there. And I'm boosting a little bit of low end. So I'm going to A-B this EQ for you so you can hear a difference. It just gets rid of that like middle boxy gross frequency, smooths it out, especially once you hear it with the rest of the drums. I'll solo everything, all the drums together, and I'll bypass this EQ and you'll hear the big difference. It just tightens up the kick drum. It just really just brings it in. I don't like the looseness of that low end because then when you bring in the bass, it starts to get all muddy. I'll give you a little taste. See, with it off, it's really hard to concentrate on both the kick drum and the bass. And now with that, it just tucks in that middle range so that the bass comes on top and the kick is just sitting where it needs to sit. So that's another great move. And then finally, I have some tape saturation just to add a little bit more warmth, and because it felt kind of a little bit dull after I did all that processing. After I did all that processing, it felt a little dull. So I added this tape saturation. I'll A-B this so you can hear it, but we'll solo it so you can hear it a little bit better. Just really brings out the high end, a little bit more crack and attack and sizzle. So I'll play you a little bit of the whole drum mix without the room, and then I'll put the room back in so you can hear what it's doing in context. And then we're going to dive into a little bit more of the advanced stuff I have going on with the drums. And then that's about it for the drums. So here's all the drums soloed without the room. So there's nothing wrong with that. It just sounds like a bunch of isolated mics though. Now with the rooms, it makes it feel 3D. A lot more full. And it smooths out our snare and our kick. Once you throw the room mics in, it really just glues everything together. And that's a sound I really do like. I really do like a drum sound with a lot of room in it, a lot of vibe. So above and beyond all that, I typically add a compressor on my drum bus so that this is everything. The kick, snare, hi-hats, toms, overheads, rooms, all fed to one track. And then on this track, I throw on this SSL compressor, which is like magic in a box. And I'll A-B this for you. I just put it on the preset stereo finalizer. And yeah, it just really adds that last layer of glue and bringing it all together and kind of bringing in the peaks so that it's not popping out. It just smooths it together. So we'll A-B this. Solo drums. Throw it on. It really just brings it in together. It's a little subtle, but you can hear that it kind of brings all the elements together. It kind of brings it in. So yeah, that's about it for the processing in the drums. That's about it for plugins and processing for the drums. But beyond that, let me switch views here. I have what are called return tracks, which are basically tracks with an effect on it. And instead of putting the effect directly on a track, like putting a reverb directly on your snare or some sort of effect directly on your overheads or something, you put it on a track and then you send part of the signal to that other track and then blend in the affected track underneath your original mix, which is a super powerful way to like use effects without it overtaking your sound. And you can send many sounds to a return track. So what I have here is a plate that I've sent my snare to. I've sent a bit of snare to this reverb plate, so I'll kind of solo this so you can hear it. It's just a subtle reverb that the snare is going to. So I'll play the drums. And I'll pop this in and out. I'll actually turn all these off. It's pretty subtle, but you get a little bit more length out of the snare when you send it to a reverb track. I also have a longer reverb that I've sent multiple things to, I believe. I've sent the snare, and I think actually I only sent the snare. So this is another reverb that only the snare is going to. This is what it sounds like. Wow. Okay. So this is the actual ROM. So this is another reverb track that I'm only sending the snare to, and this is what it sounds like. It's pretty subtle, but I'll A-B it with the rest of the drums. It just adds a little bit more cascade on the snare to add a little bit more depth. It's pretty subtle, but it's good to enhance the kind of three-dimensionality of what's going on with your drums. And then I think I have a room here, which is, I have multiple elements into this one. So I have a little bit of the hi-hat, some of the snare, I have the toms, I have the room mics, and I have the overheads all sent to this room with its own reverb on it. That's what it sounds like. I got a little bit of the bass in there as well to try and glue the drums and the bass. So I'll A-B this one with the drums. It just really adds that extra ambience. Even though we have a lot of ambience from the rooms, I am processing them pretty heavily. So I'm just sending all these different elements to another room and just adding that three-dimensionality to it. You'll notice the snare, once it hits, it stays audible for quite a while. It doesn't just hit and go away. And that tail is created from this room mic. And finally, what we have for drums is parallel compression. And what we have here is basically I'm sending a lot of the snare, a lot of the toms, a lot of the kicks, I believe. Actually, none of the kick. And the rooms, though. Yeah, the rooms to this parallel bus. And on this bus, I've loaded another compressor with a very high ratio. So this is really extreme compression, and it's going to pump. It's going to hit so hard that you're going to hear the compressor working. And this extreme setting wouldn't be something you put on your drums directly, but sending a few elements like your snare, your rooms, your kick sometimes to this element and then blending it in really increases the impact. So I'll show you how this sounds and then A/B it. Without it. With it. It's kind of that last like 5% that really just makes the drum stick out of the speakers, and it adds this crazy movement, this explosion. So listen again, and yeah, keep an ear out for that like explosion once you add the parallel compression. So it really brings the drums to life, and I'll play it with the rest of the track and A/B it. This is kind of the secret sauce for drum mixing. How shall I blame you? Check yourself and sources, you idiot. Of course, let's make new rules. Oh, why do we have to make things equal? We're all just different people inside. Have an answer in my head or something else instead, so I lie. This world is so round and you people say the dead inside. Yeah, I have an answer in my head or something else instead, so I lie. It's one of those things that once you add it and then take it out, you can't go back. You're like, yeah, I have to have that in there. So that wraps it up for all the processing I have going on each individual drum track and then collectively in the buses to get this drum sound. So I hope that helps you. If you haven't already, grab the free 7-step mixing checklist. And until then, we'll see you in the next video.